demons, entities, ghosts, all of which can be terrifying, especially when you're just trying to get through the night shift and don't expect anything odd to happen. Today I'll be narrating 3 paranormal stories. A huge thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description, for allowing me to share these awesome stories with all of you. Remember, you can send in your own stories to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, please be sure to like and comment. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I hesitated when they offered me the job as the McDonald's night shift manager. I'd already worked at the store for 6 months, but that was during the day. I rarely worked after dark, and I'd talked to coworkers who had. Super busy, understaffed, rowdy customers. Those were the general complaints, and I figured that was why the night shift manager position had such a high turnover rate. In 6 months, there had been 4 new managers, and every single one of them had quit. The last one to leave was Jesse, a guy who used to work the afternoons and would always come in high. He did it so often that I assumed that was just how he was. And then one day he came in sober and I thought, I see why they hired him. It didn't surprise me too much when he accepted the promotion. The one benefit of the position is that there is no one to complain about you. No mystery shoppers. The general manager's at home fast asleep, and you could pretend the ice cream machine is broken all you want. No one's gonna call you out on it. What did surprise me was when he quit, barely a week in. He didn't even put in a notice. He walked out of the store in the middle of the shift and never came back. His final paycheck gathered dust in the back office, and no one ever managed to get in touch with him. And that's when they offered the position to me. I had my doubts, but I'd just turned 18. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and the pay was nearly double my salary as a regular crew member. I took the job, underwent about a week of training, and the next thing I knew I was in charge of the place from 11 to 7, 5 nights a week. It wasn't bad. For the first 3 hours I would have an extra worker in the kitchen, and another one up front to take orders and hand food out the window. They both left at 3, and then the store was completely empty except for me and Miriam, the only cook in the kitchen. Miriam was a short, quiet, middle-aged woman who had been working in the kitchen for more than a decade. She didn't speak English too well, but she understood it just fine. It was around 4 o'clock one Sunday night when I understood why Jesse left. The line outside was gone, and the parking lot was empty. The floor and the tables in the lobby were spotless, untouched since the janitor left. The only sound was the constant hum of the fryers. I knew I still had things to do. I still needed to reboot the computer system, count the registers, but I took a moment to stand by the front counter, looking out into the lobby that closed each night at 11. I wasn't looking at anything in particular, but my eyes settled on the reflection in the window, and I saw something move underneath one of the booth tables. My eyesight wasn't great, so I leaned over the counter and squinted, until I knew I wasn't imagining things. It was a girl's legs, sticking straight out horizontally from well beneath the table. She had snow-white shoes, the type nurses wear. Her legs were bare, but I couldn't see anything above the kneecap. The back of her heels rested on the floor, and her toes pointed towards the ceiling. Then the toes of her shoes started to sway, back and forth, like she was listening to music. I watched her for a moment. Was she hurt? Was this a prank? People had walked into the lobby after closing before, looking to order or use the bathroom, but I'd never seen any of them act like this. Usually they'd come right up to the front counter. I'd say, sorry, lobby's closed, and that would be the end of it. But this. Hey, I shouted. The lobby's closed. My voice echoed through the building, and as soon as I yelled it, the legs froze in place. For a moment they both lay on the floor completely still. the girl under the table drew them in close, one at a time, until they were far enough within the booth that I could no longer see them. I figured she was getting up and I waited for her to show herself, but she never did. I shouted again, "I know you're there." But nothing happened. I sighed, lowered my headset around my neck, and walked out into the lobby. She was going to have to acknowledge me whether she wanted to or not. But when I turned the counter and made it to the booth, no one was underneath. I looked under the other tables, saw no one. I took a wide look, scanning the whole lobby. Besides Miriam in the kitchen, the place was empty. I stood there for a while, my feet frozen to the floor. Eventually I sighed and walked back towards the counter, trying not to dwell on the fact that I'd imagined a pair of legs under the table for at least a full minute. I wasn't going crazy. I was just tired. I put the headset back on, and when I was sure no one had pulled up into the drive-thru, I double-checked the entrances to make sure all the doors were locked. They already were. If there really was a little girl hiding somewhere in the store, there wasn't, then she would have been hiding for at least the past 5 hours. That was ridiculous. I would have noticed her before now. I took another passing glance into the lobby as I walked back around the corner and paused. In the reflection of the glass, I saw one of the white shoes now lying on the floor. I couldn't see anyone else. No one under the booth. I turned around to get Miriam's attention. Would she see this too? But she wasn't in the kitchen anymore. She must have gone to the stockroom for supplies. I turned back around, trying to get the best angle for the reflection. But from behind the counter, I could only see shadows below the table. And of course the shoe, lying beside it. A moment later, a small, pale hand reached out from the darkness, grabbed the shoe, and pulled it back under the table without a sound. I almost forgot to breathe. I stared at that reflection for an eternity, waiting for something to poke out again, for some other sign that this was real. I don't know how long it took me to realize the phone was ringing. Miriam called my name from the office. When I turned around, she was walking over to hand me the still ringing landline phone. I gave another look towards the reflection in the window before taking the phone, and allowing myself to relax when again, I saw nothing. It's late, I'm exhausted, I'm not going crazy. I thanked Miriam and answered the call. I didn't expect much. At this time of night, no well-intentioned person would ever call us. It was usually a mistake, some kids pulling a prank, or someone who wasn't sure if we were open 24/7 and wanted to call first before they drove all the way here. But I knew from the moment I heard the caller's voice that this was different. "Help. Please help me." A young, soft voice trembled on the line. A little girl. My eyes drifted back across the lobby, to the reflection of the window. Who is this? "I'm stuck," she said. I didn't see anything unusual near the booth this time. "I'm stuck under the table." "Where are you?" I asked, except I knew exactly where she was. "Help me get out," she continued, as if she hadn't heard me. "I'm stuck. I can't get out." I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, and my vision felt hyper-focused. Where once the reflection was blurry, I could see it now with perfect clarity. Nothing happened though. Nothing moved from under the table. But the voice on the phone kept begging for help. "Please, sir. I've been stuck here for so long." I almost hung up the phone right there. If I had, I think I would have pretended nothing had happened. And if the phone rang again, I wouldn't have answered it. But this wasn't the sort of thing anyone could ignore, and I had this feeling crawling through my skin that I could hang up the phone as much as I wanted. She wasn't going to stop calling. I went back into the lobby. I didn't walk any slower than usual, but it seemed to take forever to make it to the booth. I kept thinking about Jesse, how he'd suddenly disappeared without an explanation. I crouched down and looked under the table, and just like last time, nobody was there. I gave a shaky sigh of relief. The voice on the phone felt so fake now. It was an obvious prank caller, one who happened to have picked the best possible time to mess with me. "Nice one," I said into the phone, and for once I managed to cut the speaker off. "Don't call this place again." "But I can see you now," she said, sounding honestly confused. "I'm right here next to you. You're wearing a red and black uniform, and a visor." "Yeah, obviously," I said. If this was a prank caller, they needed to know the jig was up. This is McDonald's. We all dress like that. "And your eyes are brown, and you don't have a name tag, and you have a cut on your right hand." Her descriptions kept going, to the point where she was describing the way I was crouching down, to the shape of my nose, to the trembling of my hands. I looked at the window again, trying to see past my own reflection and into the parking lot outside. Someone's watching me from outside, I told myself, but I was wrong. The reflection was all I needed to see. In it was the girl's face, peeking out an inch or two from under the table. She stared right at me, nearly an arm's length away, her lips moving in sync with the words I heard through the phone. I jerked away from her, stumbling back against the chair. I dropped the phone on the floor and I could still hear the pitch of her voice from it. But no sound whatsoever emerged from under the booth itself. There was nothing there, nothing but the floor tiles and the support beam for the table. I looked back into the glass and I could still see her there, clear as day, looking up at me with wide black eyes. Her mouth moved soundlessly, but she didn't move any closer. I grabbed the phone and ran back behind the counter. My heart pounded in my chest, my throat, my head. I struggled to breathe. I looked back at the window and there she was again, watching me with her head poked out of the booth. She frowned, and dark red tears started dripping down her face. I placed the phone back up to my ears and heard her again. "Why'd you leave? I thought you were going to help me. I'm stuck. I can't get out." She kept going, and I listened, growing sicker in the stomach as she started to scream. "Please, I've been down here so long." I was snapped out of it by Miriam calling my name from the kitchen. I turned around to see her watching me with narrow eyes. "Are you okay?" For a moment, I had no idea how to answer that. I looked back at the window and saw nothing, but there's no way I'd imagined all that. I placed the phone up to my ear and heard the girl screaming again. It was almost comforting. She was real. I could hear her. I told Miriam about the girl under the table, and her voice on the phone, and I must have been talking too fast because she clearly couldn't understand me. So I handed her the phone and told her to listen. Miriam put the phone up to her ear. She listened for about 2 seconds, then calmly ended the call and placed the phone face down on the counter. "Demon girl," she said. "What?" She repeated herself slowly, making sure she was pronouncing it right. "Demon girl," she said. "Lives under the table. Don't let her touch you. You'll be fine." And with that, she returned to cleaning the grill, humming to herself. My headset dinged, and I heard a car pulling up to the drive-thru speaker. I raised my hand to the button on my headset to take the order, but my fingers stopped a few inches short. I looked at the girl's face through the window again. She glared at me, never blinking, never looking away. "Hello?" said the customer. But taking his order was the last thing I wanted to do. My palms were sweating, the room was spinning, and most of all, I felt sick. Sick to my stomach. "Anyone there?" the customer said. "Hello?" I took off my headset, walked out the door, and I never stepped foot in that building again. Ever since I was a child, I've been interested in pretty much anything related to the paranormal, the unusual and uncanny. The things which even adults found hair-raising were, for me, just fascinating. I preferred solitude and playing in the dark to anybody and anything. I adored ghost stories, and imagining monsters and all kinds of scary creatures, just for the sake of it. Needless to say, everyone regarded me as a freak, and nobody wanted to be friends with me. But it was fine. I didn't really need friends at all anyways. All I needed was the darkness and my never-ending imagination. That's how it's been ever since I was a child. Now as a college student, I took it all to a higher level, I suppose. My current occupation is doing research on the paranormal world, haunted buildings and places, and mythological creatures. And when I say research, I don't mean just paperwork and browsing the internet for information. I also mean being present in a place which is considered to be haunted, and doing research there, on the spot and in person. Can you imagine the excitement I feel as I'm walking through the empty corridors of old, abandoned buildings and eerie asylums? But that's all there ever was to it, really. I had never seen any ghosts, monsters, or anything out of the ordinary. I've even slept in, supposedly haunted places, and performed various rituals there. Still, there was nothing. Doubt began to creep in. However, there is a village near the city I live and study in, and some people told me that there's a house in that village, which is not haunted per se, but that there have been no people living in it for decades, and yet that it's still very well maintained. They told me that there's no dust on the shelves, no cracks in the walls, and no spider webs anywhere. I considered that a good enough reason for me to do some research there. As I parked my car about 10 meters away from the house, I took a glimpse at it, and I was a bit surprised as of how it looked. It was huge, but clearly run down, despite what they said. It looked ominous compared to the others in that neighborhood. The walls had a much darker shade, and the grass was at least half a meter tall, even though it was nighttime, and the houses were at least 15 meters apart from each other. I could clearly tell which one was abandoned. I turned off the car engine and turned on my flashlights as I made my way to the tall gate, which could barely stand on its own. Reaching out for the gate's door handle, I found out that it was unlocked. Not that I was surprised. As I entered the grass-covered front yard, I pointed my flashlight at the house and felt intimidated by its size. I stood there petrified for a brief moment as a feeling of unease made its way into my bones. "It's okay, nothing I haven't done before," I said to myself, as I slowly approached its entrance door. I touched the doorknob and felt a cold breeze on my skin. It, too, was unlocked. So I slowly pushed it away from me, as it creaked like it hadn't been open for centuries. It was pitch dark, and the only source of light I had at my disposal was my flashlight. As I aimed it at the interior, a huge foyer was to be seen, decorated with vividly colored paintings and beautiful chandeliers. There were 2 or 3 stairways and a few doors which made the house look even bigger than observed from the inside. It looked decent, to say the least, having in mind what the exterior looked like. This was extraordinary, actually. I was astonished by how well maintained and orderly everything had been. I approached one of the paintings and went over it with my finger, only to see that there was no dust at all. The stories were true after all. Alright, what now? I thought to myself, as I stood there in the middle of the foyer. I began exploring the rest of the rooms, but didn't manage to find anything worth mentioning. It felt like I broke inside some random house, looking for the unusual. As I turned over vases, moved furniture, and took down paintings, it felt like I was the only unusual thing this house had ever seen. But most of all, it felt like I was wasting my time. The final unexplored place in the house was the attic, which I could barely enter due to the stairs being almost impossible to pull down. The attic would have been empty, were it not for one singular book lying on the ground. It hit me that this book was the first I've seen throughout the entire house tour, even though the house had a library, so I went and picked it up without hesitation. I sat down at a table near the window, which looked out onto the front yard. The moon provided enough light for me to see what this book was about. Nothing. Literally, the book consisted only of blank pages, through and through. It was a plain white book with no title, no author, no publisher. I kept turning the pages until I got to page 57, where I found something rather odd. It said, "Stay," in a neatly written manner. Then on page 62, it said, "Leave." And it was barely readable this time. A few pages after that, "You can be just like me." And then, "It's not too late. Go." As I kept turning the pages, the neatly written messages wanted me to stay, while the other ones, with which I struggled to read, insisted that I leave. Neatly, "Join me." Messily, "What are you waiting for? Run." Neatly, "People become eternal here." Messily, "Don't believe anything. Please go." And there was the end. Rather confused, I left the book on the table, got up and went to the door, which leads downstairs. It was locked. I tried to pull and push it as hard as I could, but it wouldn't budge. For a moment I just stood there hopelessly, leaning on the wall next to the window. But then I saw another book at the opposite end of the attic. I looked at the table again, and saw that the first book was gone now. As I mentioned, the attic was rather empty, besides some vases and candles. So it was fairly easy for me to see that the first book was not there anymore. It was strange, but it made me feel a bit excited, and I liked that. I slowly approached the other book, picked it up and saw that it had a grayish color, but had nothing written on it as well. I sat down at the table again and opened the book, which, unlike the first one, showed me its content straight away. Namely, on every page of the book were 4 pictures of people, taken from a bird's eye view of around 6 or 7 meters distance. As I looked closer, I saw that they are taken in the house, precisely in the foyer. Below each picture were the names of the people, as well as the date and time of when they were taken, all in a chronological order, from the oldest to the newest. On the last one, there was I. It was apparent now that I was not alone in that house. Someone or something was there with me. As I put the book down on the table and turned around, on the opposite end of the attic I saw a silhouette of something which was not here just moments ago. My hair raised as I sat there, petrified. The creature produced sounds of anguish as it scratched the walls with its fingers. It sounded something like a whale suffering immense pain, mixed with clicking sounds. It had turned its back, and I looked at it for a couple of seconds before I regained my sanity. This was the moment I've been waiting for my entire life, right? All this time I was looking for something that is perhaps not from this world. And now that I've finally found it, it was time to act. Steadily I decreased the distance between us 1 step at a time, but as I took the 3rd or 4th step towards it, it produced a cry of such a high pitch that I felt nauseated and almost fell down. I saw it shivering and moving rather strangely, but it still had its back turned to me. I didn't know what was going on, but I don't think it liked my presence, let alone the fact that I was approaching it. I began to have my doubts of what was a smart move now, and what would lead me to my demise. The way I saw it, I could approach it and see what happens, or wait next to the table for who knows how long until something happens. The decision became much easier when I saw a 3rd book, which was all black, on the table. A bit uncertain of its intents, I slowly stepped back towards the table, facing the creature until I got there. I took the book and opened it. There were pictures of dead, or rather brutally murdered people, and as I looked closer, I recognized that those were the same ones from the previous book. Again, below each picture were the names, the exact date and time of when they were taken, and it was all, again, in chronological order. On the last page there was my name without a picture and time. I knew what followed. I turned around and saw that the creature was now facing me, with its gruesome, deformed face, red, soulless eyes, and bloody, sharp teeth, and it was staring at me and grinning. It was still shivering and scratching the floor with its sharp, knife-like hands. Slowly and decisively, it made its way towards me. As my life flashed before my eyes, I tried as hard as I could to snap out of it and stay sane. Since the window had been armored by steel bars, the only way to escape was through that locked door on the floor of the attic. I pushed and hit it as hard as I could, but to no avail. The creature screamed yet again, even louder than before, making me lose my strength for a brief moment. It was really close to me now, and just as I was about to give up, the door opened and I fell down the stairs. I managed to get up straight away and began running, but it was all pitch dark, and I forgot my flashlight on the table of the attic. I could barely see where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in the same place at any cost. After a few seconds, I knew neither where I was, nor where the creature was. It became darker and darker the more I ran, and its repeated screeches were driving me insane. My head began to hurt so much, my eyes were closing, my legs gave in, and I could barely catch my breath. I stood still for a moment, and heard a monster a few meters away from me. Then 2 red dots appeared at the end of the corridor I was standing in. I dared not move, since it seemed like it was searching for me, rather than knowing where I was. As the 2 dots moved around, I could clearly see where it was looking. I began to think that it was not a good idea to stand there any longer, since it was slowly approaching me, and it was only a matter of seconds until it realized I was there. The creature breathed heavily and scratched the walls of the corridor as it moved through it. Then it stopped. The 2 red dots pointed in my direction. It was looking straight at me now. A few seconds passed and its eyes started becoming bigger and bigger. It was approaching, so I had to act. I quickly rushed through the first door I came across. It was all pitch dark and I thought I was only getting more and more lost in the house. I kept running and after a few seconds I figured that I was back in the foyer, just upstairs. I felt a bit carried away in my relief, and the creature used that moment of unawareness to grab me and throw me on the floor of the foyer. I lost my consciousness for a brief moment, and just as I opened my eyes, it was there, standing on top of me, with its sharp hand ready to strike.
You are nothing but a sacrifice to the gods.
It sounded like it was mimicking human speech. "Tell your gods that I'm not interested," I said, as I took its hand and forced it deep inside its throat. It fell down and remained on the floor, but something told me that it was only a matter of seconds before it got back up, so I had no time to waste. Swiftly, I stood up and went to the front door, which was also locked, but I hit it with such velocity and strength that it opened straight away. I rushed through the high grass and out of the yard, then straight into my car. I turned on the engine, put my seatbelt on, and drove as fast as I could, away from that forsaken place. After nearly 1 hour of driving, I found myself back in the city. I was exhausted and terrified, but somehow I felt fulfilled. All these years of searching, studying, doing research, and investing everything I have has finally paid off. Finally, I could provide that paranormal entities do exist. My life had purpose now. I went inside my apartment, threw my bag on the couch, and headed to the bathroom, where I took a shower and patched up my wounds. Then I went to the bedroom, got ready to sleep, and jumped into the bed. As I laid down, I noticed a strange book on my nightstand, which I picked up straight away. It had no author, no title, nothing. I turned the pages only to see that they were empty, all except page 52. There it said, "It took you so many years to find us. Now let's see how much it takes us to find you." As my hands started trembling, I placed the book back on the nightstand. I saw a silhouette at the other end of my room. It was scratching on my bedroom wall. A few weeks ago, I had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. This was not unusual, as with my New Year's resolution of drinking more water than I had in the past well underway, came the unfortunate side effect of having to wake up a few times a week to empty my bladder. I did not sleep with any electronics on, and because of this I suffer from the intense blindness everyone experiences when the lights are flipped on quickly at night. Generally, to avoid the situation, I would use my phone instead on the lowest brightness setting to find my way around my apartment and to the toilet. I do not live alone, but my roommates both work the night shift. As such, I generally don't get dressed, and will leave my room in my birthday suit. The bathroom is right around the corner from my room, and even if someone had come home early, I would have enough time to hide my shame and run back to the bedroom unnoticed. It was because of this false sense of security I had come to depend on that made the situation I went through that much more heavy and imprinting. The lights were off and darkness filled our home. By the light of my dim screen, I found the doorknob to the bathroom and turned it to enter and relieve myself. I shut the door behind me and did my business. There was no hint of anything amiss until I went to the sink to wash my hands. I sat my phone on the countertop, and it illuminated my face in the mirror. I pumped some soap into my palm and turned on the hot water. Then I made the mistake of looking up. In the mirror I saw myself. Behind me though, I saw a figure that I could only make out as a man standing unusually straight in the bathtub behind me. He looked like a normal person from what I could remember. Nothing out of the ordinary except that he was in my bathroom. I became so startled I remember yelling in surprise. The man seemed unfazed and did not make any motion. He had a frown on his face that did not change. I quickly grabbed my phone to shine it behind me, and saw nothing but the tile reflecting the light back at me. I turned around to face the mirror and, in my haste, forgot the soap on my hands. My phone slipped out of my grip and landed in the sink that was now half filled with water. The light stayed on just long enough for me to inspect the man behind me once more through the mirror. He appeared to have taken a step closer to me, as his reflection was closer to mine. To be fair, I could not see very well, and as such, the man may have been this close to me from the beginning. Fear plays tricks on your mind. I scrambled for the door and nearly slipped on the floor mats in front of the toilet. My final act was to turn on the light behind me and slam the door. I flicked on the light in the hallway and stared at the bathroom door. The apartment I shared with my roommates was on the third floor of a building made up of several other apartments. Someone had been home at all points of the day, and with the entrance door leading to a small kitchen that opened to a living room, where we kept all our computers, if someone had gotten in, we would have known. I still walked to the front door to make sure it was locked, and sure enough it had been. By this time all the lights in the apartment were on, and I began to chalk my sighting up to something left over from a dream I had been in the middle of when nature called. I gave myself a few minutes to calm down, and then made my way back to the bathroom, full knowing my phone was gone. I entered the bathroom and looked at the water level in the sink, and my poor phone sitting on the bottom. I pulled it out to survey the damage. All the while, I avoided looking into the mirror at all costs. The bathtub was empty, but I was not going to chance another sighting of the strange visitor that may or may not be there watching me from a reflection on the medicine cabinet while I was naked and fuming that I had ruined my phone. I shielded my eyes from it with one hand as I left and opened the battery compartment, with the other to shake out the water that had filled my phone. I then left the bathroom with the light on and went back to bed. Sleep was hard to find for the rest of the night. When I saw my roommates the next morning, they asked me why the lights were on and the bathroom door was wide open. I told them I dropped my phone and forgot to turn them off in my anger. They laughed at me, and I knew this was a far easier conversation to have than what I thought had happened. For the next 2 weeks, they continued to make fun of the way I avoided the mirrors in the house, how I dodged the small mirror in the hallway, and the one in the kitchen next to the coat rack. They laughed when they found a towel I had left hanging over the bathroom mirror and medicine cabinet combo when I was running late for work one morning. They even laughed at how messy my hair was some days, and teased that if you only looked in the mirror once in a while, you'd catch that bedhead before you left. And they continued to laugh at me near daily, That is, until one of my roommates woke me up on their day off by screaming in the hallway and running in a panic to their room. He called me on my cheap burner phone to tell me not to leave my room and that he was calling the cops. A well-dressed, frowning man was sitting at the end of the hallway, near the bathroom, who he had only caught a glimpse of in the mirror before running away in terror. Our apartment now has no mirrors, and the permanent ones are constantly covered while we serve out the rest of our lease.